In this video, we will be analyzing Americans experiencing culture shocks in France. I'm an American who's been living abroad and traveling the world for nearly 2 years. So not only will I be comparing France to the USA, but I'll also be comparing France to all the other places I've been to.
An American living in France, and even after 5 years, there's still a big list of things that I have culture shock from. You would think I would be used to this one by now, but French people do not wait in lines like normal people. Sorry, guys, but a line is like one person after the other, after the other, after the other. French people do one person here, and then the person behind you will come stand next to you, and then this person will come stand next to you on this side. So you have no feeling that you're in the front of the line. It's like outsider syndrome, but I'm always like, oh my God, did they not see me here? Like, am I going to get cut? Just like always makes my heart rate go up. Next one is the smoking. I don't think I'll ever get used to the smoking, but a lot of people smoke here. Even see like the high school kids, they're smoking, they're vaping. If you're outside sitting at a restaurant, people will be smoking, having a drink. Will never take the air conditioning American out of me. I love air conditioning. I think sleeping in a cold air conditioning bedroom is just the best thing ever. But French people think air conditioning will make you sick and they don't like to use it. In the South, it seems like more people have air conditioning, but they just don't put it on as cold as what I like. I consider it to be like a breath of air conditioning, what they consider to be air conditioning. Notice this in public places too, like we were at the train station and there was air conditioning on, but I was still sweating. It was still very warm. This one is random, but I still can't get used to it. Here, when you finish the toilet paper roll, you throw the roll in the toilet and then you flush. I can't tell you how unnatural this is for me. I have to physically force myself to put it into the toilet and not in the trash can. I've got more. Maybe I'll do a part 2.
So as far as waiting in line goes, that's something that I wouldn't have expected to hear about France because every place that I've been to in Europe, so Spain, Switzerland, the Netherlands, the UK, and Belgium, everyone kind of queued up in a very orderly manner. In fact, the very first time I went to Europe, I visited Valencia, Spain, and I would say the very first culture shock that I had in Europe was leaving the airport in Valencia and seeing how everybody queued up one after another while waiting for the taxis. And this blew my mind because if you've ever been to an American airport and you walk out of those doors, then you realize that there is no line at all anywhere. So I wouldn't have expected France to be the exception to this. Maybe it's just where she is in France. She didn't necessarily specify, but I'm just kind of going to assume that she's in Paris or another larger city. But let me know if you think she's lying or if your experience is different because, I mean, I can't really sit here and invalidate her experience because I haven't been to France. But one thing I do know is that the queue culture is definitely different here in Southeast Asia, specifically here in Vietnam. I've noticed this happen a couple of times over the past week or so, where I'll be in line at the grocery store with all of my stuff, clearly in line, with the basket full of items, and I'll leave a little too much space between me and the counter or the person in front of me, and somebody will literally just cut me. And it's happened twice, and I don't necessarily say anything because I'm not really trying to start any trouble in a foreign country. But also, I think it's so difficult for me to comprehend that people would actually do this because in the US, I feel like that wouldn't really happen and definitely not in Europe. Again, in my experience in the Netherlands and in every other European country I've been to, that was never really a thing. Granted, most people here do respect the queue, but I think this is the first time I've ever just been egregiously cut in line like that. So I don't know, let me know what you think of queuing culture in France compared to other places that you've been to. Now, as far as smoking goes, I have a pretty fascinating theory about this, but we'll touch on that later on in the video. As far as air conditioning goes, this is something that is very controversial between Americans and honestly the rest of the world. I always thought it was just an American versus European thing. I've kind of come to realize since I arrived here in Southeast Asia that Americans might be on their own in terms of their love for air conditioning. And I say their love for air conditioning, I'm not gonna lie, I might still be more American than most people in that regard. Growing up in Texas, where the summers routinely get to the mid 40s, I mean, air conditioning is pretty much a prerequisite. You can't even build a new house without air conditioning. I'm literally almost 100% sure that it's illegal to build a new house without air conditioning or a new apartment or whatever else. So the idea that people didn't have air conditioning literally never crossed my mind for probably the first 18 or 19 years of my life. Because growing up where I grew up, it's pretty much a requirement for life. But it's my understanding that France, even the south of France, or maybe even anywhere in Europe, it doesn't really reach those temperatures on a yearly basis. Maybe not even ever. So it makes sense that most people there wouldn't necessarily need air conditioning, but I know that when I first arrived here in Vietnam with my girlfriend, we had the air conditioner running nonstop at 22 degrees Celsius, which to me wasn't even that cold. One day we get a knock at the door from what looked to be a maintenance worker, and he showed me his phone with the Google Translate, and it says something about water pooling. And I was like, what is he talking about? And he walked into our unit and he kind of looked around at the air conditioning and then he left. And I was like, okay, that was kind of strange. A few days later, I get a message from the host of the place that we're staying at, basically saying that we have to turn the AC up, or rather turn it into dry mode, because the difference in temperature between our unit and the unit above us was so big that their unit had water pooling on the floor. So I mean, evidently here in Southeast Asia, where the temperatures are much closer to the temperatures that I grew up with than they would be to a place like France, I guess even they don't really like cold air conditioning. Flushing the toilet paper roll, that's something I've never heard of. I don't know if that's a French specific thing, but in the Netherlands, I was there for 14 months, I never once flushed the toilet paper roll in the toilet. And the people that I was with, they did not do that either, and they're Dutch. So I know in the Netherlands that is most certainly not a thing. Let me know why that's a thing in France.
The amount of smoking that happens in Paris is actually crazy. I just made a video explaining that I'm sick all the time since moving to Paris, and I've lived here for 3 years, and everyone in the comments said it's probably the mold in our buildings, the air pollution, or the secondhand smoke we're getting all the time from how many people are smoking cigarettes here. And recently I went to a restaurant, was sitting outside for about 3 hours, drinking, eating. There was this group of friends sitting at the table next to us, and they were literally smoking cigarettes the entire 3 hours we were there. I don't think there was a moment where this girl did not have a cigarette in her hand, and I noticed because the wind was blowing all the smoke right directly into my face. So even though I choose not to smoke, I was basically inhaling secondhand smoke for the entire 3 hours I was sitting outside. And I didn't realize how bad it was until I looked down at my leg and saw white stuff all over it. I was so confused to what it was. I went to brush it off and realized it was a ton of ash from her cigarette. Literal cigarette ash was all over my leg. I also feel really bad to complain about this because I'm an American who chose to move to Paris. Smoking cigarettes really isn't a part of our culture in the US, but here in Paris and in France, smoking cigarettes is a big part of their culture. So obviously I don't want to be that American that moves abroad and then complains about things that French people just do, but this will forever be something that annoys me because I feel like I can't generally enjoy being outside, sitting on a terrace, even walking to work as I am right now. People are smoking cigarettes, standing outside of buildings, and all the cigarette smoke, they go and they blow it into the person that's coming up right behind them.
So again, I have not been to France before, but I feel like most Americans, even the ones who are uncultured and uninformed, know that France has a pretty big smoking culture. I think that's where most of that stereotype about European smoking cigarettes comes from. It's from France and maybe to a lesser extent the UK. Now, I have a theory about this, and before I even get into my theory, let me just go ahead and put this out there. I did do a little bit of research, and I found that the smoking rate for adults is higher in France than in the US. My theory is that Europeans, although again French people do statistically smoke more, they seem like they smoke disproportionately more because the cities are structured in such a way that you just see more people on a day-to-day basis. So when you see more people, naturally, you're going to see more people of all different demographics. You're going to see people that represent every single statistic, every subgroup. I feel like if 23% of Americans smoked, it still wouldn't seem as bad because in most of the US, you're spending a lot of time in your car. And so you're not coming in contact with a whole bunch of pedestrians in your day-to-day life like you would in a place like Paris. I mean, you saw she was walking through a pretty densely populated area. When you have an environment that's built in that way, generally you see more people walking. And when you see more people walking, you're just gonna see more people doing more things. And smoking is just one example of that, but it's also an example that disproportionately impacts the people around. So, I mean, I understand her frustration looking down at her pants and seeing that there's just ash all over, like a volcano just erupted or something like that, when she's just trying to enjoy her meal at a restaurant. I get her frustration. I would be pretty salty too. The reason why smoking in Europe confuses me is because I feel like when I think of European culture, and yes, I'm generalizing because I think that most European cultures, compared to the US at least, are much more community oriented. They're much less individualistic than American culture. The whole idea of that community oriented culture is that the individual sacrifices their interests for the sake of the betterment of society as a whole. And again, this is to varying degrees throughout Europe. Maybe a place like France is a little more individualistic than a place like Norway, for example. But both are less individualistic than a place like the USA. And that's why it throws me off to know that more people in France smoke than in the US. Because the US is a very individualistic culture where people fight for the right to have guns and be able to shoot guns and have guns in their homes. But there's a very big stigma around cigarettes, which is a very big contradiction, by the way. And for me, I am just as low on gun ownership as I am on cigarette smoking, by the way.
One of the biggest culture shocks when I moved to France is how negative French people are. And I'm not talking about in attitude, I'm talking about linguistically. They love to speak in the negative. And yes, there are also lots of studies that show French people tend to be more pessimistic than people of other nationalities. But that's a whole different discussion. What I mean instead is how much French people love to speak in the negative, even when they may be expressing something positive. Let me give you a few examples so you can see what I mean. Oh my god, that's amazing. Ouais, pas mal. Girl, that is so smart. Ouais, c'est vraiment pas bête ça. Wow, this wine is delicious. Cette vin c'est vraiment pas dégueu. Oh yeah, 100% true. Ouais, c'est pas faux. That's really cute. C'est pas moche. No thanks, I'm full. Non merci, j'ai plus faim. What a great price. That's cheap. Ah, c'est bien, c'est pas cher. So if you want to sound more French, be more negative.
I find it fascinating how the linguistic structure of a place can inform the overall mentality of a place. She mentioned very, very briefly that French people are statistically shown to be more pessimistic than a lot of other nationalities. Now, I don't know how they went about gathering that data, but I also feel like there is some credence to the idea that speaking in the negative will create a more negative mentality. And I'm not trying to put down French culture, because I don't think having a negative or pessimistic mentality is always the worst thing. The reason why I say this is because having spent 14 months in the Netherlands, I found that the stereotype about Dutch people being master complainers is very true. It's a very true stereotype, but because they're always complaining, things actually get fixed. Whereas in the US, for example, you have a culture of optimism, and as a result, people just kind of justify things that should not be justified. For example, gun culture. And we also know that Americans, just like any other place, when they create a negative social stigma and create an air of pessimism around something, like smoking, for example, generally, society follows suit, because humans, regardless of how individualistic or community-oriented their culture is, tend to be pack animals. Humans are very community-oriented, albeit to varying degrees. So I think that there is sort of a hidden link between the linguistic dynamics of the French language and French culture maybe being a touch more pessimistic than other places.